Hey there, and welcome into another episode of the Route 1 Rundown. If you eat, sleep, and breathe Maryland basketball, then this is the place for you. I'm your host, Steve Corgi, and I'm thrilled to be back for another episode to talk some Terps. But before I dive into everything going on in College Park, just a reminder that this show is on YouTube and part of the Department of Hoops, a DMV media network. So if you're listening to the show, but you want to be watching it, you want to see my face, you got to go and check it out. It's youtube.com/@Department of Hoops. Be sure to like the episodes, leave a comment, and most importantly, share it with a friend who loves the Terps. And if you're not just into the Terps, you're into the Wizards, you're into other mid-major local basketball, we got everything there for you at the Department of Hoops. There's something for you there if you love local basketball. You can also find me all across the internet at the same handle, at Gorgon Sports. That's Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok. There's so much going on. It's March. It's here. It's the best time of year if you're a college basketball fan. So I'm going to be talking about everything going on Maryland-wise and elsewhere in the world of college basketball, even between those episodes. So make sure you're following me all across the internet at Gorg on Sports. And if you are watching on YouTube today, then you can already see I have a bunch of special guests here for today's show. Today, I'm joined by my friends, my college roommates at Maryland, and two of my three former co-hosts on the National College Basketball Podcast, The First Four Out. I'm pleased to welcome to the show Brian Kaufman and Shane Connolly. Shane, how are you?
I'm doing great, Gorgs. Thanks for making us a part of the show.
Absolutely. Got to do a little First Four Out reunion. It's been a little while. I had to get the crew back together with the kind of season the Terps are having. Brian, how are you today, my friend?
I'm great, man. And what a first season for you to have this show, right? It's been so much fun watching the Terps resurgence, and I'm very excited to be here to talk with you about it today.
Truly, truly a joy. Could not have asked for anything better in this first season of doing this show because, I mean, it has been a long time since I've had this much fun with Maryland basketball. But let's look, the three of us, we've all watched a lot of Maryland basketball together, probably more bad seasons than good seasons. But I did this with Matt Moderno when he came on the show. We had a great conversation about the Terps. I asked him, what's your favorite non-national title Maryland memory? And he gave a great answer about Gravis Vasquez driving around the M, honking his horn and yelling out 15 assists after he put up 15 assists. I think it was against UVA. And like, if you went to school when we did, that all checks out perfectly, right? So Shane, do you have a moment that when you think Maryland basketball, like, this is a special one for me?
All right. Well, I mean, the obvious answer is the 2010 Duke game. I did just watch the first full half the other night on YouTube because why not? That's what one does on a Friday night. That's the kind of life I lead, that I'll just watch the full game broadcast of a game from 15 years ago. But it was that special of a game that I'm more than happy to do so. So that's but that's a pretty easy answer. The other one is also from that season. Earlier that year, there was some, it didn't actually start out that great, and there was some conversation around the job that Gary Williams was doing, and there was some negative scuttlebutt in the media. There's, I think, a big piece in the Washington Post that was kind of critical of him, a lot of Debbie Yao, Gary back and forth, and that all came out before the home game against Miami, and Gary came out and he let out the most vicious of fist pumps before that game when he walked out of the tunnel. And honestly, that basically kickstarted our run through the ACC that season because it wasn't great up until that point. Yeah, that was just an epic fist pump, an epic moment from a legend in Gary Williams.
Kathy Worthington's never won a national championship. That poor staffer in the athletic department, whoever she was, she probably, like, looking back at that now, that was probably like, you know, now we're older, we're adults, like, we have real jobs, we actually work. Like, she was just probably trying to do her job. She got caught up in the wrong place, wrong time, gave a quote to the Washington Post, and, like, every Maryland fan and Gary Williams himself turned on Kathy Worthington. But that's an all-time line. You can use it in any context. Like, you know, somebody does something, somebody messes up in your personal life. Kathy Worthington never won a national championship. Like, it's just it's an all-time line. I'll never forget that name. And she probably never set out to be known by deranged Maryland fans, but yet here we are. Brian, how about you? What's your all-time favorite non-national championship memory?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, Shane's being a fist pump is so on brand. I love it so much. Like it's not a good. Yeah. I mean, I was gonna go with the easy answer. Now I kind of feel ashamed. I mean, like to dial in, to double click on the Duke game. I think that I mean Jordan Williams. There you go, Shane, and Gary We Trust. Only somebody who has an "In Gary We Trust" pin in their home in the year of our Lord 2025. His favorite Maryland moment is a Gary fist bump, but I love it. Yeah, I mean Jordan Williams dunking on John Shire, like we were there. I mean that's like such a special one. I think like to go back, so I'm Howard County born and raised, lifelong Terps fan. So go back a little bit more just to find a good answer here. Um, I mean, I will absolutely never forget Drew Nicholas' shot against UNC Wilmington. Like just such a formative memory when you're 12, 13 years old, even though it came after the title. It just like was such a cool moment. I actually, so dear viewer, you might not know this, my friends do, but I just relocated to Wilmington, North Carolina. So I am learning a lot about the history of UNC Wilmington basketball, and of course that shot. A little trivia, if I may, Steve. Uh, do you guys know who the head coach of that UNCW team was?
I don't. I know the guy that hit the 9 threes. I know his name, Brent Blizzard. I'll never forget that name. But I have no idea who
Yeah,
the coach was of that team.
yeah.
Shane,
The
do you know?
coach is he's currently a prominent coach who has his team in the top 10 or 15 of the AP poll.
Now you got me.
Brad Brownell
Oh
Oh,
wow.
was the head coach of
nice.
that UNCW
The now
team.
longest tenured ACC head coach, believe it or not.
Unbelievable, unbelievable. So
Right.
yes, I mean, I actually just watched it before I was going down memory lane myself. Drew Nicholas takes the inbound, drives down, hits the three, keeps on running. Just kind of like an iconic March moment. And when that happens for your team, it sticks with you forever.
I think that was legitimately the last time Maryland has been on the right side of a
Yeah, no
moment
kidding.
like that in the NCAA tournament, certainly, but really maybe in the postseason. I mean, in 2004, obviously a great run through the ACC, but there wasn't a moment like that, like a buzzer beater like that. And of course, Maryland has suffered their fair share of blows over the years following that game. So maybe this is the year there's a little bit of magic in March. Maryland is on the right side of one of those because March is here, boys. It's here. The regular season is over, and Maryland finishes up the regular season at 14-6 in conference. They will be the number 2 seed in the Big Ten tournament when it kicks off this week. The Terps' first game will be Friday night. They will play the winner of Illinois, the 7 seed, who will play either Iowa or Ohio State. Ohio State, the 10 seed, Iowa, the 15 seed. But I want to look back for just a second at kind of the end of this regular season because Maryland finishes up the regular season last Saturday with a 74-61 win against Northwestern on senior night. And guys, there was a point in this season on January 6th, the day after the Oregon loss, Maryland was 1-3 in the league. On January 17th, the day after the Northwestern loss, this team was 3-4 in the league. They finished the year 14-6. That means they won 11. They went 11-2 over their last 13 games. And both of those losses are on a Bruce Thornton banked in 3 at Ohio State and the Trey Holloman more than half court buzzer beater at home against Michigan State. Those were their only 2 losses over the last 13 games. So Shane, if I had told you after that Northwestern loss when Brooks Barnheiser went off against Maryland and they beat the Terps in overtime, if I had told you that Maryland would finish 14-6 and as the number 2 seed in the Big Ten tournament, what would you have said?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to believe, and not even over that longer stretch, even over a much shorter stretch. As you guys know, after the Michigan State loss, I definitely went to a negative place. We've seen a lot of seasons turn south in late February, early March for Maryland last few years, and you have a heartbreaking loss like that. In a game that meant so much to the team and so much to the fan base, and you're going into a house of horrors in Penn State. You're going to a team that had been, atop the conference for most of the season in Michigan, and then you're playing, a pesky Northwestern team at home. You would hope to get that one. But, I mean, that looked like a recipe to be losing 3 out of the last 4 heading into the Big Ten tournament. And so the resiliency, not just earlier in conference play, but even just in the last couple weeks. And I'll say this. I mean, I think this is something that we're going to probably maybe pay more attention to moving forward now that this is the first year of the West Coast teams being in the Big Ten. Like, Kevin Willard was not thrilled with the early season schedule, and a lot of people wrote it off, with some PTSD of just like complaining for the sake of complaining. I mean, maybe he was right. Like, maybe that wasn't but also maybe it's like, if the West Coast trip is going to suck regardless and kind of maybe like get you out of your rhythm a little, like
Get it out of the way.
maybe that is good to just get it out of the way in early January, when for Maryland, like, students never come back until the late in January anyways. Like, yes, it may make the record look ugly in that point in time, but it's like they had road games, at the defending Big Ten champs, who team ended up with 3 seed, and then the West Coast swing. Now, listen, a loss at Washington's still a bad loss, but like, ultimately, maybe we should have expected the schedule to kind of favor Maryland down the stretch a little bit more. But I mean, it also would have been easy to kind of just lose the rope and get down on themselves. This is a team that didn't have a deep history with one another, where they could rely on one another. They could rely on the coach. It was a lot of new pieces. So a ton of resiliency over the last couple months, but also even the last couple weeks. And just a hell of a job by everyone on the team.
It's interesting, after the Northwestern game, Willard was specifically, I don't know if he was asked or was just talking about that stretch early in the season, and he said, I would have rather gone and done that West Coast road trip at any other time than when we did it. But to your point, maybe it was, I actually meant to go today and kind of look at how teams fared on that swing, and I didn't have a chance to do it. I'd imagine it's a tough swing. We saw teams, how many years, even in the Pac-12, where teams were out on the West Coast, like going to that Colorado-Utah swing was tough for a lot of teams, like with the altitude. That stuff does matter. I think people want to dismiss it. I think it does matter, but I couldn't agree with you more. They've shown resiliency so many times over the course of the season. And a guy who has shown so much resiliency over the course of his entire career has been Julian Reese, who goes out with a 19-point, 11-board game on senior night. He puts up his 36th career double-double, his 14th of the season, and now Julian Reese is 23rd on Maryland's all-time scoring list. He's 3rd on Maryland's all-time rebounding list. I was there. I was at the game on Saturday, and I was in the crowd giving Julian Reese a standing ovation, along with not probably quite 17,000 other at that point, but I would say a good 11,000. And there was real emotion in the building when he came out, and he was recognized, and there was certainly real emotion when he was pulled with under a minute left in the game, to see him embrace Kevin Willard and the rest of the coaching staff and his teammates, because this is a guy who I have said on social media, guys, he is, to me, the modern day Walt Williams for this Maryland basketball program. Walt Williams, he put up unbelievable numbers as the program was transitioning under a really dark time from Bob Wade to Gary Williams, but he was a guy who could have left and didn't. He stayed. I wasn't really watching Maryland basketball at the time. I was a year or two old, but from my understanding, as somebody who loves the history of Maryland basketball, he was a guy who really carried this program through a dark time and gave people a reason to watch. He put up outstanding numbers. He was a great player. Now, Julian Reese hasn't put up quite those numbers, but I view him in a very similar way, because this guy had every reason to leave Maryland on multiple occasions. Multiple occasions. Mark Turgeon recruited him here to Maryland. 10 games or so, I think it was 10 games. It was December of Julian Reese's freshman year. Mark Turgeon steps down. Okay, right there, most guys, especially in this era of college basketball, out of here, gone, somewhere else. He decides to stick around. Kevin Willard comes in, has a really great sophomore season with Grant Billmeyer as his big man coach. Billmeyer gets a head coaching job. He is gone. Still stays. I'm not saying you always leave because you're a position coach leaves, but it seemed like they had a very close relationship and he developed him a lot. Maryland has a terrible year, Julian Reese's junior year. I don't think Julian Reese had the best year that he could have had last season. They bring in Derek Queen, McDonald's All-American MVP at his position, and Julian Reese decides to stay. Julian Reese, to me, it comes back this season, has a great year, is climbing up those all-time lists, and it was great to just see him have that moment and be recognized. I know I was long-winded there. I know there was a lot to say there. I just can't express enough how much it meant to me being in that stadium. And I think it meant to a lot of people in an era of college basketball where all you ever hear is people complain about people leaving at the first opportunity they get. And look, I'm a huge proponent of NIL. I'm a huge proponent of players getting paid. I have been talking about it since our freshman year English class in 2007 when I did a persuasive argument on that and why the NCAA needs to compensate players. I am all for that. But there is something about watching a guy develop over 4 years as part of your program, and I think that's what we saw with Julian Reese. Brian, how do you view Julian Reese's legacy?
It's so rare what he did in this era. I like what you said about this era, right? Guys don't do this. They don't stay. One thing you also, I'm not sure if you mentioned, but like Angel transferred after his freshman year too, right? Like, and not only that, she transferred and turned into the best player in the country and has this huge successful career after leaving Maryland, somebody in his own home. So yeah, I mean, listen, I do view him as a great. I think there are different things that can make you worthy of that status. And his numbers, there was a time in his career, and I don't know if I'm the only person on here that would say this, but there was a time in his career where I wasn't that excited if he got the ball on offense. And now it's a 180. I was thinking about this earlier, actually. His like left-handed, baby hook that he's got that is just pretty nasty at this point reminds me a lot of Dino Gregory's development of the mid-range by the end of his career, where it was like, oh, this guy like figured out a way to become a problem offensively, a strong contributor offensively. But regardless, I mean, in the history of Maryland basketball, I think he goes down. He's a local guy. He stayed home. He stayed home again and again, like you said. And just the development over the years is really remarkable. So I think, I don't know if he's a jersey in the rafters type of guy, but he's the type of guy who, when you talk, you won't be able to tell the history of Maryland basketball without him at this point. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the improvement in free throw shooting this year, too. Just over 74% on the season. Last year shot 56.8% as a sophomore, 53.3%. That it can solely be attributed to hard work and dedication in the offseason by Julian Reese, Shane.
Yeah, no, I mean, the free throws is unbelievable. Like, what he's done this year, and the free throws is the kind of thing that, like, the lazy fan always just, like, to your point, like, oh, just get in the gym and shoot some more free throws and work into free throws. Like, and it's not that easy, but like he did it. Like, it is an unreal jump that he has made at the free throw line this year. And it is definitely through hard work. It's not just because one day he woke up and could shoot free throws better. Like, it's definitely through a lot of hard work, which is amazing. Yeah, he's an all-time great Terp, and, love what he's brought, love his decisions. Not just one decision, but his multiple decisions to stay. I mean, his total numbers at the end of the day are going to be up there. I mean, he's probably going to be, I think I heard that he might be the first 1,500-point, 1,000 rebound player, or at least one of a very small list of people. Because actually only Len Elmore has over 1,000, so I don't know how he doesn't have 1,500 points, but whatever. And he does have an outside chance. He'll probably pass Lonnie Baxter for 2 on the rebounding list. He's got an outside chance of becoming number 1 over Len Elmore. Now, if he passes Len Elmore, he probably gets his jerseys up in the rafters because it also means we made a hell of a run at some point here in the next couple of weeks. And not because he's one on the rebounding list, but even just kind of being in that Lonnie Baxter, Len Elmore rarefied air, like that's the elite of elite. And that's just what he did do on the court. Never mind all the stuff that we've been talking about his meaning, outside of that to this program in the last 4 years. One other thing, not on Julian Reese, but just I also do want to shout out for the senior day that Jordan Geronimo. I mean, you want to talk about a reason to leave. Like, he basically went from starter to buried on the bench one more year. This guy who, transferred already from Big Ten program. Like, listen, we'll get into, how much concern we have about the bench or whatever. Is like the one piece that I am confident coming off the bench right now is Jordan Geronimo. So I don't even want to think about the bench if Geronimo also left heading into this year. So, I do want to give just him a quick shout out because it was his senior day as well.
No, that's a great point. That's a good call out. He's a guy certainly who gets lost, but he is a guy who throughout the season has always provided, when he's been healthy and able to play, he provides energy. He doesn't provide scoring always, but he is an important depth piece on this team. And you're right. It would be extraordinarily concerning how thin this bench was if it was not for Jordan Geronimo and what he is able to bring coming off the bench. So, look, I think Julian Reese's ultimate legacy is going to rely a lot on what happens over the next month here. This is a March sport. College basketball, like it or not, is a March sport. Legacies are made by what you do in March. And Maryland, really nice job since that Michigan State loss of finding ways to grind out wins, to get 3 victories against Penn State, Michigan, and Northwestern. But it's not without some concern for me. Since Monday, February 24th, that was the Monday before the Michigan State game, Maryland is number 211th nationally in offensive efficiency, according to BartTorvik.com. They're number 1 defensively. This is a little bit of a shift from what we saw earlier in the season, where it looked like this was a Maryland offense that could really carry them through. You have the Crab 5, that 7 times this season, all 5 starters are in double figures. But it seems like, you can look at this one of 2 ways. This team's taken a step back offensively over the past 3 weeks, or this team has really grown on the defensive end. Brian, are you more worried about the offense right now or confident about the defense as Maryland heads into the postseason?
It's a great question, and it's a great way to look at it. To me, this team has it's been such a breath of fresh air after last year to see a team that can shoot from distance, right? And so they're a team that shoots a lot of threes and shoots them well. To me, in March, right, this is my favorite thing about the team. We talk about the Crab 5, is that anybody can pick it up on any given night. So I am so encouraged by the defensive play, the intensity that they play with. It has me as excited as anything going into March because, listen, it's a team that's going to have to find ways to, like Michigan State, okay? They grinded that game out. It was gross. It was gross, and the offense hasn't looked quite like that. They had Jacoby Gillespie uncomfortable, just like getting the offense into rhythm. Nothing was coming easy. You're going to see that in March. You're always going to see that in March. What I was thrilled by is the fact that the Terps are making it hard on teams defensively too. And so, you look at the offense, right? I think 4 or 5 times since the start of December that they haven't had a 20-point scorer. There's always somebody who's there to take over a game. And the beauty of it is the whole starting 5 has been the leading scorer in the 20s at some point over the course of that time. So while you don't want to be going in this direction going into March offensively, to me it's a bit of, it's in there. It's going to have to come out if you got this run in you anyway. And so I'm so excited that the defensive intensity's been really ratcheted up. I would go with defense. I'm impressed with what they've done defensively because I've seen what they can do offensively, and I know it's in there somewhere, and it'll come out if they need it. Shane, it looks like you're about to shake your head at me.
No. I tend to agree with you. I'm encouraged by the defense, especially because earlier in the year, even when we had good defensive numbers, it seemed like we couldn't quite get stops when we needed to get stops. Obviously, the whole Michigan State disaster started with a stop that they got when they needed to get a stop, and then Gillespie comes down and misses 3, and all we know what happens from there. But now I feel way more confident against Michigan. They got stops when they needed to get stops. So I am way more confident in the defense, which is good. In terms of the offensive issues, I tried to look a little bit in terms of, because just there was nothing in my mind that said we've been doing this really poorly. It's kind of been a little bit of a different thing in each game. Like Michigan State, the 3-point shooting was horrendous. Obviously, Gillespie was really bad. I think he was 0 of 7. And then we had the 3 combined inexplicable threes from DHS and Queen. I think you eliminate those, you give Gillespie 1 out of 7 even, and the 3-point shooting in that game and that game in general could look a lot different. Also, they didn't offensive rebound at all. Give credit to Michigan State there, but usually they're a little bit better on the offensive glass to get extra possessions. Obviously, Northwestern, the turnovers were horrendous. So there's that. Michigan and Penn State, Penn State, they didn't really get to the line all that much. So it's kind of been a different thing. The one thing that has been consistent is like the 2-point field goal percentage has been way lower in the last few games, which kind of seems like a random thing. And as much as I just said how Julian Reese is an all-time great, it's honestly really been him that, like, in terms of all 4, has had a subpar performance. I think he's like 8 of 30 or something from the field in the last or 8 of 28, something like that. He's basically like 33% from the field in the last 4 games. And this is a guy who's consistently been high 50s, low 60s throughout his entire career. And maybe you'd be worried about fatigue, but like he's still been good at the line, like incredibly so. I mean, I don't think you could have ever picked out a 4-game stretch in his career where he's shot better from the line than from 2-point field goal percentage. And he's been playing phenomenally on defense. So like, I don't think he's getting fatigued. I think it's more of just the random 4-game blip is what I would like to think. Like he's been getting, I mean, again, Michigan State did a great job defensively. I'll give them credit, but like a lot of the times in the last 4 games, like he's gone to that little, left-handed hook that Brian mentioned, or his little floater in the middle of the lane that he's gotten, and like, or even layups, and it just hasn't gone down. I still feel very confident that will not be the case for the rest of the month of March. And so for that reason, I'm not wildly concerned about the 2-point offense. Honestly, like if he shot 50% from the field in all those games instead of like low 30s, like you're ticking up 4 to 6 extra points per game. And all of a sudden just the offensive efficiency looks a lot different.
There is one thing that does concern me, Shane, when it comes to that 2-point field goal percentage. And I feel like Maryland has not gotten to the rim the same way they had been earlier this season. I had pulled it up. I can't remember for the life of me now which game it was over this past stretch here. I think it was actually the Michigan game. Okay, yeah, in the Michigan game, Maryland had 15 shots at the rim, 23 mid-range jumpers. Of those 15 shots at the rim, 10 of 15 came from Derek Queen, Julian Reese, and Jordan Geronimo. What that says to me is the guards, Jacoby Gillespie in particular, has not quite gotten to the bucket the way that I felt like he was earlier in the year. And that is something that does concern me, because I feel like over this 4-game stretch, what you've seen a lot of from these defenses is you've seen a combination of a few things. You've seen some teams play zone and really pack it in, but not like a zone, not like a bad middle school zone, like a real good zone where you're packing it in, but you're long and you can get out and defend the 3. A lot of times when you hear zone, people think it's just give up easy 3s. That's not what a good zone looks like. But we've seen that a little bit, and we've seen teams be more aggressive with their ability to switch and more aggressive on the ball screens. And that, like, I've brought this up probably no less than 5 times on this show over the past month, but a team like Houston in the NCAA tournament is a team that really scares me because of how they're able to, how long, athletic, physical, and aggressive they are on the defensive end. Because I think that's part of it with this team. And now, is it possible, like, they figured something out over these past 4 games and they can make an adjustment and adapt to that? Absolutely. But that's something that I do have my eye on over these last 4 games that does concern me, that does scare me as we enter the postseason, where games get tight. It's fewer possessions often. I think that's why it's going to be really important for Maryland to, A, force turnovers and get out and transition and get easy buckets. But B, that is why it is nice to have a guy like Selton Miguel, who, like it or not, some of the shots that he takes, like, he can go off, and we've seen it. Rodney Rice can go off. It's going to come down to guys making individual plays at times. And it's maybe that's a simplification of it, but I think that's going to be really important come tournament time with this offense.
100%. And I think Sultan Miguel is a great example of kind of what I was trying to get at before of like somebody's going to have to make something happen. And like he's a guy that he tries to make something happen. When he's feeling it, that guy's going to keep on shooting. And it's been a funny kind of journey as a viewer and a fan of the team because Sultan Miguel has taken a fair share of maybe not good shots, not good looks, right? But I think like at this point in the year, I'm on board with whatever he wants to do because that dude, when he gets in rhythm, his little step back, he had a few in the Northwestern game that were really nice. That guy can bring it, Shane.
Yeah, and to your point, Stephen, I mean, one thing that does give me, hope, not just are those guys, can they get really hot, but they're great. They don't just make, open threes in the corner when we talk about them getting hot. They make tough shots. They make the kind of shot that you could play great defense, and then the other team's fans are saying, what the hell? What else can you do? Like, we're talking fadeaways. We're talking, contested shots, like from 2, from 3. And again, specifically Rice and Miguel, who are basically the 4th and 5th options on the offense. So, like, that's what gives me hope that even against a great defense, if those guys get going, they're going to get going, and there's not much you can do to stop them because they are great, tough shot makers. Now, sometimes they go a little too quickly to, as Brian mentioned, to the tough shots, and maybe that's not the greatest thing for the offense, but like the fact that they have that in their bag does give me hope even against a tough team like Houston or something like that on defense.
No, there's no doubt about it. It's the fact that there's 5 guys who, even if everybody can't necessarily create their own shot all the time, they can create their own shots at times, and they can make tough shots, and you never know who's going to step up. I'm reminded all the time, if Orioles fans out there, Orioles Magic, you never know who's going to hear the call, right? You never know, and you never know with this Maryland basketball team this year who in the starting 5 is going to step up and be the hero on any given night. And because of that, for me, it was a big question mark throughout this season. How is Maryland going to be represented when it comes to the all Big Ten teams? Well, those honors and those teams came out earlier today. Derek Queen was named to first team all Big Ten as selected by the Big Ten coaches. He was second team as selected by the media. Jacoby Gillespie, third team on both the coaches list and the media list. And Julian Reese was an honorable mention by both the coaches and the media. Queen is also on the all-freshman team and was named Freshman of the Year by both the coaches and the media. So, Brian, I'll just let you have at it. What's your reaction when you see Derek Queen, first team by the coaches, Freshman of the Year, and him really being Maryland's representative as far as the Big Ten honors are concerned?
It's really, really interesting year for the Big Ten honors. So I kudos to DQ, great year, awesome. He lived up to the hype, right? I think this team wouldn't be where they are and wouldn't have such a promising outlook entering March if he wasn't there. So freshman of the year, I mean, everybody thought the Rutgers guys were going to get it. This is awesome. From a Maryland fan perspective, it's super cool to see that representation. We were talking a little bit before we went on. It's so funny about Michigan State winning the league by a couple of games, but not having somebody that's a shoe-in for the first team, and obviously didn't have anybody represented on the first team. Whereas Maryland, you could make an argument legitimately for 3 or 4 guys to, like you said, kind of be that representative. For me, I kind of thought we might see Jacoby Gillespie on the second team at least. I think that's a guy that has felt for most of the year like the straw that stirs the drink a little bit. But I also think that DQ's the name that people know a little bit more nationally, and that does come into play with this sort of thing. I think that okay, Braden Smith is the player of the year. Well, he was the preseason player of the year. He had a great season by all accounts. But there wasn't an obvious slam dunk choice, so you go with the guy who is the guy that people know, the guy that was sort of expected to have that level of impact. Super exciting to see Queen get this sort of recognition. But you're right. It's fun to root for a team where you could make an argument for three or four guys, and I might have made an argument another way.
Shane, how about you?
Yeah, listen, I'm happy that Queen got the recognition because I could have seen a scenario where all the players split and Maryland topped out with guys on the third team, not because they weren't deserving, but just because of the way the vote goes. So I'm happy that at least Queen got the recognition. My first gut instinct from a pure Maryland perspective was like, how does Rodney Rice not even get honorable mention? I mean, he's guy basically averaged 15 points a game in conference for the team that finished number 2. But again, like Brian said, like Michigan State not only didn't have a number guy on the first team, they didn't have a guy on the second team. Like that's life in an 18-team conference. It's really hard to, an honorable mention, by the way, I think it's just guys who received any kind of vote. So like that means someone had to put Rodney Rice on their third team, which when you look at the teams is pretty tough to justify. Like Jacoby Gillespie barely made third team. So like it's tough to justify. So I'm in retrospect not that mad about Rodney Rice, but I think, it's crazy. An 18-team conference when it comes to, and credit to the Big Ten, this has been a thing I've been on my high horse on for a long time, is they kept it to 5 guys. I think there was a tie maybe for the coaches, their team. But, some of these conferences, like the Pac-12 was notorious for it. They would put like 10 guys on the first team, 10 guys on the second team, and listen, we saw where that got the Pac-12. So now we have an 18-team conference. There's even more reason to expand the teams beyond 5 guys. But guess what? 5 guys are on a basketball team on the court at the same time. So kudos to the Big Ten for keeping it 5, but it does make life really tough in terms of getting those recognitions. And the other thing, though, and I think this is maybe kind of what you were alluding to, Steve, is like I kind of generally think the like adage of like best versus most important is ridiculous. Like 99% of the time, like your best player is your most important. Like, I used to work in the NBA talk space where like in the Warriors run, like people would be like, Steph's the best player of the Warriors, but you know who the most important player is? Draymond Green. It's like, no, Steph Curry's the most important player of the Warriors. I promise you, he's the best player. He's the MVP. He's the most important player. Like, but I do think that this might be the rare case where like Derek Queen is the best player on Maryland, but Jacoby Gillespie is the most important. Like his bad games have been Maryland losses. Derek Queen has had some bad games where Maryland has still won. And I think that, part of it is just the, position of point guard. But I do think that is a thing for Maryland this year.
I agree. And, I think it brings up the question, okay, whoever is Maryland's MVP might differ from who was going to get recognition on these all Big Ten teams. Because I don't want to take anything away from Derek Queen. Like I've heaped praised on Derek Queen all season long. He is visually, outside of Steve Francis, probably the most fun Maryland basketball player I have ever watched, just because of his combination of skill set, intelligence, the way he plays the game, the way he sees the game, the things he does at his size. But I agree that Jacoby Gillespie, I think, is the MVP of this team, and some of that might be by virtue of position, but we have seen Derek Queen get in foul trouble, not score very much, and Maryland go and win a game. We really haven't seen Maryland win when Jacoby Gillespie doesn't play well. In Maryland's 5 losses since the calendar turned to 2025, Jacoby Gillespie has averaged just over 10 points in those games, and he's gone 5 of 24 from beyond the arc, which is just under 21%. The fact of the matter is, when Jacoby Gillespie isn't at his best, the Washington game very much comes to mind. He made some plays in that Oregon game, but I think he made some big mistakes in that game too, including some late turnovers. Maryland doesn't win. So that's why I feel like Jacoby Gillespie is really the MVP, really the most important player, to your point. And then, like, I do have some other advanced stats here. Evan Maya, a site that I really like as far as player ratings is concerned, Evan Maya has Jacoby Gillespie as the number 2 player in the entire conference behind Braden Smith. There was a point in the season where I felt like Jacoby Gillespie was really taking on that mantle of, like, he is going to be the next great lead guard in Maryland history, from Anthony Cowan, from Melo Trimble. There's so many throughout history. Those are the two most recent guys. I thought he was kind of filling that role at times. And in that Northwestern game, even though it was a loss, he hit a couple huge shots in that game, in that loss on the road. There was a criticism at one point on one of the broadcasts that some of Maryland's losses have been because Jacoby Gillespie is not a true point guard. I don't buy that at all, but I do think this team will go in the postseason really as far as Jacoby Gillespie will take them. I don't think they can win if Jacoby Gillespie truly has a bad game. But with that, let's get to the postseason, because we've gone 40 minutes now and we haven't talked about the game that's coming up on Friday, Maryland's first round or quarterfinal game against Illinois. Shane, before we get on to that, what do you got? It seems like you got
I did just want to throw
here.
some flowers. I just did want to throw some flowers to Derek Queen, because you hit it, but like, he has been incredible. And it's great that he won Freshman of the Year when you had the two guys like Brian mentioned coming in for Rutgers. Like, and I think a lot of Maryland fans tried to kind of tamp down enthusiasm for Derek Queen, despite him being a 5-star coming in, for two reasons. One, I think a lot of people were unsure of the fit next to Julian Reese, which, again, credit to Julian Reese, who, for making that work, going back to that conversation. But like, the history of 5-star big man freshmen coming in and making a huge impact is not all that long. I mean, nationally, you just look year after year, there are guys who are top 10, top 20 players in the recruiting rankings, and they do basically nothing their freshman year, and then maybe they grow into something, maybe they just jump straight to the NBA and they're a lottery pick, and they're just never have an impact on college. I mean, listen, Diamond Stone had some nice moments for Maryland, but like, I think the Diamond Stone experiment, or experience, kind of made Maryland fans a little gun shy on getting too enthusiastic about Queen. I think, even Alex Len started getting NBA top 5 pick buzz, but like, the on-court impact wasn't always there in the same way that you would hope. Like, Derek Queen has been a way, way, way better player than either of those guys who had the 5-star pedigree, top 5 NBA pick pedigree. And I just want to say how much of a joy it has been to watch him play this year for Maryland, and how happy I am that he won Freshman of the Year.
Shane, you don't have to go outside of the conference for a great example, because Xavier Booker at Michigan State, he was a guy that was ranked number 11 in the class of 2023. And he's a guy, Michigan State plays a ton of guys, but I think against Maryland, he played 8 minutes. Now, he had a big shot in that game, but he is a guy in his sophomore year, after being the number 11 player at the country as a big man, barely plays. He's a bit player on that team, a 10-minute per game type of guy.
And that really is the norm for top big men recruits. So like, that's not even just a shot at him. That is kind of more usual than not for the big men recruits. So, but Derek Queen has not been that. He has been all that has been promised and way, way more. So not just productive, but like you said, like, so much fun to watch. So I did want to just pause on that and really, throw some flowers his way, because that has been one of the most fun parts of the season.
No doubt about it, and well deserved. And I felt like I'm glad you did, because I felt like we had not praised him enough as we're talking about Maryland's lone representative on the first team All Big Ten. I'm glad you did that, because it is well deserved by Derek Queen. And the last time Maryland played Illinois, Derek Queen had a great game, 25.6 rebounds. Julian Reese, 27 points, 17 boards in that game. Now, in part, it was because Tomislav Ivasic, Illinois' big man, was out with an illness. But the last time Maryland played Illinois, they beat them 91-70 in Champaign. It was what got Maryland off the losing skid on the road. It was at a time where nobody thought Maryland could win a road game, much less in Champaign. Now, it's not guaranteed Maryland is going to play Illinois, but if the seeds hold, Maryland will play the Illini on Friday night in the first round. Illinois, the 7 seed, Maryland, the 2 seed in the Big Ten tournament. And quite frankly, in that game in Champaign, Maryland rolled. They won by 21 points. They forced a ton of turnovers in that game, 16 turnovers, and they thrived inside. In fact, it was a game where Maryland only shot 12 threes. They went 3 of 12, but they still dominated that game and won by 21. That is very likely Maryland's opponent in the first round on Friday, although again, not guaranteed, depends how things played out. Iowa or Ohio State could beat them, but it will very likely be Illinois. And Illinois is a team that since getting absolutely demolished by Duke has gone on a tear in their last 3 games. They went 2 of 26 from beyond the arc against Duke. Well, in the 3 games since, they've gone 34 of 96, just over 35%. They are a team that shoots a ton of threes. They have one of the highest three-point rates in the country. They're not the greatest three-point shooting team, but they're a little bit live by the three, die by the three, and they have some guys who have really gone off over these past 3 games. Trey White has averaged just under 18 points. Will Riley, really good freshman, just under 17 points. Kylan Boswell, just under 16 points. And then you add to it a guy like Yakachonis, their point guard, who he's a really unique player who, in a very different body type than Derek Queen, can kind of do a little bit of everything. In fact, I compare him really favorably to one of all of our favorite players, Gravis Vasquez. Illinois is a team that, quite frankly, scares me going into the Big Ten tournament. Brian, what do you see from this potential matchup between Maryland and the Illini on Friday night?
Yeah, they're playing really, really well. We talk about resilience from Maryland after the Michigan State game and how they battled and won games. I mean, you talk about obviously the Duke scoreline jumps off the page, but they had just lost big at Wisconsin. They had just lost big to Michigan State. They had dropped 3 in a row, and they've really turned things around, like you said. They're. I wouldn't certainly expect it to be a game like last time where they turn the ball over 100 times and Maryland rolls. This is going to be a tight game, a tough game. They are a good defensive team, Illinois, and it scares me a little bit. Now, I do think, right, when a team is live by the three, die by the three, which I think you're totally right about, I think you can plan accordingly, right? And Maryland has done a nice job mixing up their defenses as they've really improved, like we talked about earlier in the show. So, no, I don't expect it to be a similar game as far as Maryland cruising, but I do think the Terps match up favorably. I think that they're a team where they have all these different ways to beat you, and so if you can get out, chase the 3-point shooters off the line of Illinois, I think it looks good on paper, Shane.
Yeah, listen, I think you're also being a little generous towards Illinois. They're not just not that good at shooting the three; they're like really bad at shooting the three. But actually, amazingly, like despite that and them shooting a lot of threes, that doesn't totally screw them up. And I think part of it is because they're also really good at crashing the offensive glass. Like they've had some games with outrageous offensive rebounding rates. So obviously, Queen and Reese are very good defensive rebounders. Like they're going to need to, definitely have that be the case. Like we saw that kind of bite them in the Michigan State game. So that is going to have to be something they're going to not just have to corral underneath, but guards too, making sure when they miss those threes that they don't get the long offensive rebounds and everything like that. So, that's going to be a huge key to this game as well, is the defensive rebounding, because they will miss a lot of threes in the game. Even if they make a lot of threes, they're also going to miss a lot of threes in the game. So, making sure you clean up the glass and keeping it to one possession game is really going to be crucial for Maryland if they do end up playing Illinois. And I will say, I do, not just because I think Illinois is scarier, because like you said, they've been great in these last 3 games showing resilience. But I do hope that they get a chance at some revenge against Ohio State after that Bruce Thornton 3. So I wouldn't mind seeing Ohio State as well if they knocked off Illinois in a 7-10 matchup to get some revenge there. But
here's one thing that does scare me about Illinois. It's more their offense than their defense. Like, I don't think they're actually a very good defensive team at all. Michigan State, Wisconsin, and Duke all really took it to them when you look at efficiency, when you look at raw points. I mean, Duke put up 110 on them, and Duke might very well be the best team in the country and ultimately the national champs. But, like, I don't think this is a very good Illinois defense. What does scare me is that they can go 5 out, and they have Ivisic, who is a good big man inside, but against Michigan they went 5 out a lot. And I was going back and forth a little bit with Isaac Trotter of 24/7 Sports the other day on Twitter, and Isaac Trotter, I think, is honestly, I think he is the single best college basketball writer out there right now. Like, I love his work. He's awesome. And I was asking him, like, hey, he wrote a good little piece on Maryland and how they could make a March run. And I was like, what worries you about this team, or what kind of team worries you? And he mentioned Florida because Florida can go 5 out, and Maryland hasn't played a lot of teams that go 5 out, and that is something. I'm not saying they can't handle it, but he's right. In the Big Ten, you don't see a lot of teams go 5 out. It's a little bit of a different look that they've seen. I actually think Queen does a pretty nice job when he has to guard smaller guys, to be perfectly honest. But I think I think about a game like Marquette with a guy like Ben Gold, and yeah, that was way back, fourth game of the season, whatever it was. But it's not the kind of guy and not the kind of team Maryland sees a lot of. So I do think it'll be an interesting challenge for them if it is Illinois that they end up facing, Shane.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It is something, but I think Queen has been much better, to your point, in that regard than I expect. Like, I know, Danny Wolf had good numbers in the Michigan's game, but I thought Queen did a decent job, against him in terms of a stretch four type of player. Now, if you have him and Reese, and again, not just the staying in front of them on the perimeter, but just what that does to the normal cadence of rebounding. If the whole team is used to having Reese underneath the basket, Gillespie knows, or, that he can gamble a little bit more because Reese may be able to clean it up on the back side. If Reese is out of the 3-point line, that might not be the case. Does that come back to bite him? And then the rebounding side of it as well. It's not going to be the normal positioning to go grab the rebound that it normally is. That could be an issue in those two regards towards, seeing a team that is a little bit more perimeter oriented.
No, as good as I think this Illinois team is playing, I actually like the fact that Maryland gets Illinois from a resume building perspective, because Illinois now in the top 15 in the net. Purdue is the number 6 seed and on Maryland's side of the bracket. Purdue, if they were to advance over Michigan, that's a team Maryland could play in a Big Ten tournament semifinal. They're number 14 in the net. I think those are two really good resume building opportunities. And then if they were to get to the Big Ten championship game, they'd play Michigan State potentially, which is I think at the moment, I think they're number 11 now. I'd have to check on that 100%. Yeah, Michigan State actually up to number 10 now. Maryland number 11. So it's debatable how much that championship game matters and how much the committee really takes it to account, given the fact that it tips at 3 o'clock or 3:30 on Sunday afternoon. But I think Maryland has some good resume building chances here, Brian. When you think about the Big Ten tournament, how much do you look at it as I would really like Maryland to do well and advance and possibly win this tournament because it's something that's important to me as a fan, versus this is a chance for them to build a resume and get ready for the NCAA tournament? How do you look at those two things?
Yeah, I might be sitting on a hot take here, guys. I don't know if how this will go over, but for me, I'm looking at the big dance. I don't. I've always kind of viewed it that way. Winning a tournament is great. Hanging banners is important. He's Tito. He's getting ready. Yeah. I mean, we can play the hypothetical about how would you divvy up your wins, and I'm the guy who's going to get as deep as possible in the big dance. I think that is ultimately what, as a fan, matters to me and what I want. So, give you the floor here to rip me apart. Go ahead.
No, I think it's a common refrain. I'm just somebody who cares. I think I care more about the conference tournament than most people, and certainly among Big Ten fans. I think among Big Ten fans, it's not nearly as important as it ever was among ACC fans. I actually think in the SEC, it's started to become more important with how that tournament has gotten more tradition in Nashville and how good that league is, and certainly among Big East fans, that's an important tournament. But I think it would be important, it would be very meaningful to me for Maryland to win this Big Ten tournament because, A, they've never done it. Maryland is building tradition in this league. I think Maryland is starting year by year, starting to feel more a part of this league. But they've never won a Big Ten tournament. They've split one Big Ten regular season title. I think winning a Big Ten tournament would be very helpful in establishing some fond feelings among Maryland fans of time spent in the conference and in key moments. We talk about moments all the time. That's a moment, winning a conference tournament title. I would also add that Maryland, in its entire 61-year history in the ACC, won it 3 times. That's not very good. That's not very often. Duke, I think, won it 1,000,000 times, it felt like. Coach K owned that thing. Maryland struggled mightily for years and years and years in the ACC tournament, but I do think ultimately at the end of the day, if you can go, like, getting to a final, okay, it's as arbitrary, I guess, but getting to a final doesn't do nearly as much for me as winning it, because that's what you play for. Like, as a coach, as a player, you play for championships, and to me, this is a real chance to win a real championship. So that's why it's important to me.
Yeah, I'm kind of aligned with Steven on this one. And listen, I definitely, Steven grew up going to the ACC tournament, watching Maryland. I grew up going to the Big East tournament. So definitely, like, I am predisposed to, having a proclivity for conference tournaments, for sure. But I think you kind of got, like, there's a finality there that if you win it, not if you got to the championship game. If you got to the championship game and lost versus getting to the semifinal and loss and losing, not a huge difference to me. But if you win it, like, there's finality. Like, if you get to the Sweet 16, like, yeah, that's a banner. Or even the Elite, but it's like, if you get to the Elite 8 and you lose that game, like, you're devastated in that moment. Like, you know what I mean? And even though, like, that is a great accomplishment, right? Even the Sweet 16, like, you're going to, and then if you lose to a 1 seed, say, if they're a 4 seed or 5 and lose to a 1 seed, like, all right, like, that was good, but, like, you're ending on a loss, right? Like, so, there's not, it's that cutting down the nets. It's that sense of finality of, like, wow, we just won something, and not just like, oh, this was a good benchmark on a journey that in all likelihood will end with a loss at some point soon.
You know what I think it is for me?
But maybe they'll just win the national championship. That'd be fun.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, maybe they will end on a win.
This is what I was going to say. It's like, let's be real. Like, let's put our cards on the table here. To me, this team is good. It's been fun. It's been a really fun year. But at the end of the day, unless something goes absolutely wonky in this bracket, this is not a team that's going to win a national championship. And I say that not to disparage the team, but to acknowledge that, to me, there are many different ways in college basketball you can have a successful season. And winning a conference tournament is one of those. Look, there's one team that's going to win a national championship. And over the last 2 years, there's been one program that has won a national championship. Has everybody else failed? I don't think so. And I just don't look at it that way. And I think that's, like, I don't want to go too far afield here, but that's something that I've really noticed has changed in college football over the past couple of years, and especially with the advent of the 12-team playoff. Now it's like, it feels very NBA rings culture-ish, where it's like the only way you can be successful is to win the NBA title, win the national championship. For this Maryland team, realistically, like, I don't see this team on the level of Duke. I don't see this team on the level of Auburn. I think those are the 2 best teams in the country, and I don't think it's particularly close. And in all likelihood, last year we had the UConn-Purdue final, and they seemed like they were the 2 best teams all year. We're probably not going to have that because it's college basketball and it's a single elimination tournament. But I think there are multiple ways to have a really successful season. And I think for this Maryland team, winning a Big Ten tournament would ultimately be a really successful season, at least for me.
Yeah, 100%. Now, going back into it coming short of that, what you originally kind of started with in terms of wins for seeding, I do think it's probably an outside shot, especially as you mentioned. They may not really take into account what happens on a Sunday championship game if they win. But beyond that, like, again, it would take a lot of help and some really impressive performances this weekend. But, like, getting to a 3 line would be a huge difference, because I agree with you, Stephen, that I think Duke and Auburn, even with Auburn's recent, struggles, like, they're kind of a cut above and have been all season. I think, as you mentioned, Houston, who is probably one of the 3rd 1 seed, is a very tough matchup for Maryland and their style of play. So, like, that's 3 right off the bat, and and you also mentioned Florida for a different reason, being a potential tough matchup for Maryland. Now, obviously, yeah, you're not going to get a good matchup with a 1 seed, but, like, I do think that like the 4 projected number 1 seeds like are all not great for various reasons for Maryland. And so I do think there's a kind of decent drop off to the 2 line. So if you could get to a 3 seed and kind of get that as a potential Sweet 16 matchup, that would be a big difference. Now, again, even though they're kind of mostly projected as a 4, it's more 4 borderline 5, and there's a lot of teams in between them to get up to that 3 line. But it's not impossible. So that I think would be the other big thing to watch for this weekend.
Boys, even
But
Jerry Palm has
you didn't want to
Maryland's
be
4 seed
devastated.
now. Believe
Oh
it or
wow,
not.
he's come around.
It's unbelievably consistent at this point. I mean, I'm just looking at the first, let's see, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 14 brackets listed here on Bracket Matrix. There are 4 seed in all of them. It's like unbelievably consistent at this point where Maryland is listed. It's a 4. They're a 4.02 seed on average, which is amazing because like as recently as after that Michigan State game, I mean, there was people that had them as a 7 seed. And it's because those results-based metrics had been so different than the predictive metrics and that non-conference strength of schedule that everybody had referenced. But the results-based metrics have really gotten a lot closer to the predictive metrics. Like Maryland's results-based metrics now range from 15 to 20. Their predictive metrics range from 13 to 15. That's really tightened up quite a bit. And then you throw in 7 and 6 in quad 1 games, a chance to possibly get 3 more or 2 more that really matter if they can get to the final. I think there
also in terms of comparing to other Big Ten teams. I mean, Purdue's been scuffling a little bit down the stretch here, and Wisconsin had a horrific loss over the weekend. So I think kind of in comparison, when you're talking about Maryland has been kind of number 2 in terms of the predictive metrics for a while in the Big Ten, but now that they actually finished number 2 in the Big Ten, I think that's probably helping leapfrog some of those other teams. And listen, the last 10 used to be something that the committee officially considered. They don't now, although I think they should, given the transfer portal and how teams are going to change so much year to year. Like a lot of teams are going to grow a lot during the course of the year. So I think they should officially bring it back. But whether it's official or not, like it has to weigh in the mind of the committee to a certain extent. So I do think finishing strong here, both what they've done the last few weeks and then potentially this weekend in Indy could definitely help boost that case.
I'm not sure there's a more impactful seed line change than jumping from 4 to 3 in the entire tournament. And you're talking about playing a team like Duke in a Sweet 16 versus playing a team like Michigan State, playing a team like Auburn in a Sweet 16 versus playing in a team like St. John's. As good as they've been, St. John's has a lot more weaknesses than Auburn does. Like I think it's a huge deal if your one and only goal is to advance as far as possible. And I think you would also see over time, like it feels, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it feels like there are a lot more 7-2 upsets over the years than there are 8-1 or 9-1. Like there's a chance for that. It always feels like there's a chance for that bracket to open up a lot more on the bottom side of it.
Yeah, and let's be honest. We have some tortured history in that 4-5 game in recent years. So there's that looming overhead as well.
Yeah, certainly so. No doubt about it. Because I want to wrap up with this one thing. Is it's something I've become a little bit obsessed with over the last week. I'm 100% convinced if Maryland is indeed on the 4 line, they're going to be placed in the East region, Newark, New Jersey, where Duke is going to be the number 1 seed. Because we know the selection committee loves a good storyline. And it would be the first time Maryland and Duke have played since Maryland left the ACC. You also add on to the fact that Cooper Flagg, the best freshman in America, number 1 pick in this year's NBA draft, was high school teammates with Derek Queen, one of the other best freshmen in the country. It just feels like that storyline would be too juicy for the committee to pass up. Not to also mention that Maryland, as the number 4 seed, I think would get some protection, some regional protection as a top 4 seed. And I'm sorry, that's only holds for the first and second round. So nix that. But either way, I think it's a really juicy storyline. And if the committee has a chance to do it, I think they would do it. Now, Brian, if this were to happen, and you could only go to one, let's say you said you could choose, like, if you go to this Maryland Duke Sweet 16 game, you can go to the Elite Eight game that's at the same site, but you can't go to the Final Four. Which one are you choosing? Are you rolling the dice, or are you going to Maryland Duke in Newark, which I think would be the single most anticipated game since the 2002 national championship game? And I don't say that with any exaggeration. I genuinely, truly believe that.
Yeah, man. Wow. I've always said, I talked to my wife. I'm like, if Maryland ever goes to Final Four, these three guys on screen, some other friends, like we're going. Like that is a dream. We did a icebreaker at work recently. If you got X amount of money you could spend on anything, I said I'm taking all my buddies and we're sitting courtside when Maryland plays for a national title. I've always wanted to go to the Final Four. But man, I think I'm going to the Duke game. Like that is just unbelievable. I also, side note, did find out that my buddy who lives about 20 minutes away from Newark does have tickets to the Sweet 16. And so as this has become, as a fellow Maryland fan, as this has become more and more realistic, I'm like, man, you hit the jackpot. I asked him, he said he paid like maybe $150 for a pair. I'm like, you are not going to be able to get anywhere close to that if that happens. Yeah, I think I'm going Duke, Shano.
Yeah. Here's the thing. Contrarian play and like a loss in that game would be so devastating. Like that, I don't know if I can make it back.
I mean, it
across
would be, but like
like
you're going into it
well,
expecting a
listen,
loss if they have to play Duke.
yeah, but like yes, but like again, I just watched back the 2010 game and like as soon as the schedule came out that year, I saw that game was Graves' senior night. I said 100% we're winning that game. Like there was no chance we're losing. However, like I also know that like that's a logical view. When we get to the moment, like there's no way I would be like, yeah. They're favored. Like they'll probably win.
No,
Like
Terps are going to kick
again,
their ass.
this
Yeah.
is kind of more contrarian. Obviously, that's the bigger game. Like that's the one I would like. That is like as Steve said, probably the most anticipated game. Like a Final Four, like I could enjoy. Like if we went to the Final Four and it's in San Antonio and like we're playing Auburn or whatever, and it's like okay, like I can go, I can enjoy the weekend. It could just be a celebration of this what is 100% an incredible season. Like yes, I know we were talking about finality with winning a Big Ten tournament. Like I do think in some ways, weirdly, like finality of getting to the Final Four, is kind of a thing weirdly in college basketball. Like I could enjoy that as a celebration of the season. Like there even if they lost the game, there's a zero enjoyment if I go to.
Listen, that's fine. That's a great point, but I know you well enough to call BS on that statement that you would go watch them lose a Final Four game and be totally chill about it.
I mean that's probably true. That's probably true too. But like, listen, it's also you're going to Newark. I mean, hey, we went to that game against Seton Hall where they played like crap against Kevin Willard's Seton Hall teams in Newark. That was not a fun experience. Losing in Newark, New Jersey is not fun. Can confirm.
No.
Here's the reality. Look, you're going to go. I'm just pretending as if a genie offered you this. If it happens, I'm going to Newark and I'm going to the Final Four too. Like it doesn't matter what the cost is. It doesn't matter. I'm going.
Wait
to
a
go.
minute.
So it doesn't really matter.
We were given that option.
I just do think. I mean, that game. I can't imagine. Like, and I think I'm interested in this because it means something very different. I think to the three of us and a generation above us than it does to a current student at Maryland now, who the last time Maryland and Duke played a game was 2014. Now, I don't want to alarm you guys, but that means that some of the freshmen at Maryland right now are probably about 7 when that game was played. I don't know how meaningful it would be to the current generation of like students at Maryland. However, I think if you grew up in the area and you have a parent that was a Maryland fan, you probably know enough to know that it's a big deal. And I wonder how many people, like, I'm convinced everybody 30 and older, it's the biggest game they've ever seen. It's the biggest game since 2002. There's no question about it. Anybody who is a Maryland fan, anybody who lives in this area, anybody who has ever put on a Terps hoodie would be watching that game and or trying to get to it. But I am curious, like, how much, Shane, do you think it would mean to the current group of students, and could it reignite some of that old passion?
Yeah, and listen, like Duke is just generally hated across the country. So even if you grew up a Maryland fan today, like you probably dislike Duke having nothing to do with the Maryland Duke rivalry. Like that is a thing as well. So like, and Duke is obviously based in North Carolina. It might as well be based in New York, New Jersey at some point. So like that's where a lot of their alumni base is. They always play games up there. So like there's a lot of Maryland alumni from that area. So like that would play into it as well. So I still think it would be meaningful. I mean, it definitely the most meaningful matchup you could have. Still, I think, especially there. I mean, I know I was joking about Newark, but like that is essentially like neutral territory in a weird way. Like both fan bases would kind of claim it as like a second home type area where a lot of alumni are. So like that would play into it as well.
I think like I compare it to the last time Maryland went to the Sweet 16, which was against Kansas, and a matchup against Duke feels infinitely more important, infinitely more relevant on a national scale even. Like I think that would that not be the game that everybody is talking about nationally leading up to the Sweet 16, Brian?
It absolutely would be. Yeah, it's got all the juice, all the storylines you were talking about. Plus, I mean, at that point, if Maryland made it through the Sweet 16 and they're a 4 seed, like they didn't do anything crazy to lose their momentum in the Big Ten tournament. So they are, because I do believe Maryland's a team that like some people are going to look at their bracket. I don't know if they face Duke, but like people are looking at Maryland as a team that might have a run in them, right? So that's an exciting matchup, and you're absolutely right. And let's just go get that 3 seed. What do you say?
Yeah, let's hope it doesn't come to that, and it's actually an Elite Eight matchup versus Duke. Guys, thanks so much for joining. It was an absolute blast. Look, it's been a fun regular season, but the real fun is about to begin because it's March. We got postseason play coming up, and I have truly not been this excited about a Maryland basketball postseason run since 2010. We all know how that one ended. Let's hope it ends a heck of a lot better than that. Brian, Shane, thanks so much for the time. Everybody out there, thanks so much for listening, and I will be back on Selection Sunday. Look at that fist pump. That's the kind of fist pump you're going to see when Shane walks through the tunnel in Newark in a couple weeks from now. But I will be back on Selection Sunday. That will be the next episode. I'll be giving you my instant reaction to wherever Maryland winds up in the bracket, and hopefully talking about the Big Ten championship win that we just saw, Maryland's hopefully first ever, but certainly talking about everything bracket related, breaking it all down. Then I'll have some more content coming out next week with some deeper breakdowns and analysis and deep dives leading up to that first round matchup. It's the best time of year if you're a college basketball fan, and it's the best time of year if you're a Maryland fan. Maryland has not been this relevant in years and years and years. That's the show for today. Until next time, this has been the Route 1 Rundown.